Okay, so again, good afternoon. Thank you for joining our next Lunch and Learn session. I'm going to go through our typical housekeeping notes, and then I'll pass the presentation over to Susie to get us started. So today's session is being recorded, and it will be made available to all participants after the event. So after the event, keep an eye out for an email that will come from me, Allison Jones, and it will have a copy of the slides that you're going to see today, as well as a link to the recording of the presentation. So if you do have folks within your practice, or if you have customers that weren't able to join us for the live session, you can share those links with them and make sure that they are taking advantage of the information we're going to share today. All attendee lines are in listen-only mode, but if you do have a question, please use the Q&A tab as well as the chat function to send those over to us. We will try to answer those as we go through the presentation. If there's something that we can't answer right away, we'll save it to the end, and if we have time, we'll address it then. If not, we will make sure that we follow up with an email communication after the session is over. On your screen, you should be able to see today's slides. So we are going to have two different topics today. So we're going to talk about the summary of the 2018 MIPS reporting, and then we are going to talk about prescribing updates, specifically IDP Process. So Susie's going to start us off, and then Alina will finish up. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Susie to get us started.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. We're going to go ahead and get started on this. I wanted to kind of start today's session doing a little bit of a summary of MIPS reporting for 2018, only because we're in November already, and the deadline for reporting is March 31st, but the end of the year is approaching pretty fast information on that. So I just kind of wanted to go over some things just to kind of make sure that you have that information, and then to kind of use it as a guide to start getting ready. This is the QPP website. Information that pulls onto it, and of course this is where you could go in to find out if you have a certain provider, if they're eligible to report MIPS or not. Information you can always report even if you're not eligible, but this is a good place to go find out and make sure that that provider that you're reporting on is eligible to report this year of information that goes on, and just to kind of keep that on file, information that pulls on. Also, with the QPP website, if you haven't, most of you should have by now, but some may not, but make sure that you have access to log into the QPP website with your login and password, which you get through clear back from when we did the PQRS reporting. But it's just a good thing to have that access to that information, because your reporting does come back into the QPP website. So you want to make sure that you always go back and check that and have access to that. So if it's something that you don't have, I'd recommend getting it, or if you have it, I'd also recommend making sure that your password works, that kind of information that goes on, so that you just kind of have it in your little toolkit as for attestation and what you may or may not need. So promoting the interoperability, again, it's what we knew as the ACI last year, and now it's changed to the PI, or promoting the interoperability information that comes through. So CMS had to kind of change the name to that information to focus on interoperability, improving flexibility, and relieving burden. So just a little bit of probably differences in language or information that you hear, just knowing that the ACI is now PI, but in our system we still have our reports documented as ACI. So just kind of make that connection information that goes on. So with this year, in 2018, for MIPS reporting, there are two measure sets for submitting data. But basically, the one that it depends on the certification edition that you are on. Currently, we are on 2014 edition, and will be through the end of the year for your reporting purposes at this point. So the reporting that you're going to be looking at and the measures is going to be the promoting interoperability transition objectives and measures. The one up above where you're noticing just the objectives and measures, that is towards the 2015 certification. And so there's measures that you don't need to report on with the 2014. So right now, we are at the 2014 certification, and that is what you'll be reporting on. With the transition reporting, there's a requirement of the 4 base scores for the transition measures, and it's a security risk analysis, e-prescribing, provide patient access, and health information exchange. And so with these measures, you have to be, in order to get credit for the PI information, you have to attest to those. So with the security risk analysis, just make sure that you've been doing it. If you've been reporting for ongoing years, you've been doing it every year, because you must attest yes to this in order to pass the attestation. But make sure that you're really doing that in accordance to the Federal Registry and the HIPAA rules, so that, and you have it documented, so that if you did get audited, you can go ahead and prove that that's done. It's not just a yes/no answer. There's a lot to that risk analysis, so you want to make sure that you have that on file and capable of being able to submit it in case they do audit you, and have it done this year. E-prescribing is basically as it is for a while. Understand that the current reporting does include scheduled medications, depending information that pulls on in that PMSI metric report. Also with this measure, it only requires that you send one, but most people we've been doing it for quite some time. So there's not an actual, for MIPS reporting, there's not a actual measurement put up to it other than you've done one. You don't get any extra points if you've done 1,000 of them. The e-prescribing is just pretty much right then and there to be able to get it done and to be able to report on that. Provide patient access. This is the ability to provide patient access with WebView or Relay Health. And for some of you may have been beta testing the UpDocs. It would also include the UpDocs information that pulls onto it. So this is just making sure that the patients have access to that. And with this measure, it looks at the clinical encounters created and then the patient given access to be able to log into the portal for right now for that measurement. So you want to make sure that people have access and information that pulls in. It doesn't include them so much as logging into the system and downloading data. That's another measure that's not required for the MIPS, but you want to make sure that you have that. And if you look at your reports now, that you've got measures on there. And then the health of information exchange is also, it requires the use of the direct messaging. And keep in mind, the numerator requires that a return receipt comes back into our system from the receiving site. So when you send it out and you check the box, return receipt, when the receiving site receives that email, they must open that email up so that it sends a message back into Practice Partner indicating that they have received that message, information that pulls through. This is one that I really recommend that you make sure that you have at least one on there so that you can qualify for it, but make sure you're really on top of that, because a lot of receiving people may get it, but they may not open it up, information that pulls on, so you want to make sure that you stay on top of that so that you can attest to that, and have at least one on there so that it qualifies for your ACI reporting or your PI reporting. There are also exclusions with this, with certain measures on that. You've got your e-prescribing. So if you write fewer than 100 permissible prescriptions during the performance period, you can exclude from the e-prescribing measure. As always, if you're going to exclude from something, I highly recommend that you document and show proof of why you're excluding from that, because it's at the top of the list also to be audited as it comes through. The request to accept a summary of care, that's a 2015 certification, so you don't really, for this year, you don't have to worry so much about that, but it does fall in line with the health information exchange. So again, if you refer out less than 100 times during the performance period, you can exclude from that. So if you don't have information that pulls through, but then again, you want to make sure that you can prove why you're excluding from that measure all in all to be able to exclude from that information in that measure. Submitting data, again, for this year is similar to it's about the same what we had last year. The attestation can go on through the QPP data submission system. However, with our system, keep in mind that you don't have the ability to submit a QRDA file that would be accepted at the QPP website because of the time period on that. So if you are going to say, I'm only going to report the minimum so that I don't get dinged later on, and that is going to be in the form of improvement activity information that comes through, then you could go ahead and use that data submission system to go ahead and do through the QPP website information that pulls through. But if you've got clinical data that you're going to go ahead and report through the CQM, that really, at this point, it has to be going through a qualified registry of some sort. We use the LytecMD information that comes through, and if it's a qualified registry or a clinical data registry, they're required to report the data for you. So if you're using any of those, or a lot of you may be in an ACO, that they're also reporting the data for you. So you will collect your data in the electronic health record as far as your PI objectives through the metric report, and then that information could go through them. The improvement activities, whatever ones you're choosing or you're using, you most likely are going to use your EHR, so you want to make sure that you have information to prove that this is the activity that you've done, but that data would be submitted through the qualified registry information that goes through. So you should have a dashboard of some sort information to be able to go ahead and manually enter that information on. But there again, anything that you're going to be reporting on, you want to make sure that you run it and that you're prepared to be able to attest to that information before you ever start. Most likely, you'll be looking at a testing probably around the middle of February, maybe sooner on that, but I know for a lot of the qualified registries, we'll be waiting the month of January by the last refresh and information that pulls on, so you're probably, looking at the middle of February, but you do have till March 31st. However, make sure that your data is good to be able to report prior to the end of December so that you know that you're meeting what you need to meet on that. So in Practice Partner, you've got multiple reports in there to use. And I know on the support side, we're still getting a lot of calls as to confusion as to what reports to run. So for the 2014 certification, you'll be running the transition measures, and then the report to run would be the ACI transition information that pulls through. And you can see what I've highlighted in here, the information that you've got that you can report on, information and pull all that information, pull through it. The 2015 is the report that's called the ACI. Now you run it and your numbers should match up to what you're doing on the other report, but there's extra measures on that again is 2015 certified, and you're not required to go ahead and report on those. So the report to run for this year for the MIPS is going to be the ACI transition. This report allows you to run it for your 90-day period, and again in this year you can report for any consecutive 90 days in 2018. So you're not required to do the last quarter, and if you've already got your information onto that, you make sure that you run the report. I always recommend, again, for my little toolbook, that you have a little file in there that shows you running the report and showing that it was run out of the system, information that pulls through and the dates that you chose, just so that you've got print screen and date stamp type information on there. This report allows to run by a single provider, which if in your situation and you're reporting individually for your providers, that's how you would want to run it. You can also run this report by providers by practice, and I'll talk about that just a little bit as well, or you can do all provider information that pulls through that's going to pull all of them. So it just depends on how it is that you want to run. The all providers and the specific provider is going to give you all providers in the practice and calculate individually, whereas affiliated with the practice is going to combine them all up, information that pulls onto that. So it's just a matter of going in and how it is that you're going to report, and to whether it's a group or individual or so forth. If you're reporting Medicaid this year, you're going to go ahead and report on the modified stage 2, 2015 plus information that pulls through, again, for your time period. You can run that. Providers affiliated with practice, you have that option in this report as well, or specific provider information that pulls through. Now keep in mind with the modified, if you're doing Medicaid, they're still doing modified stage 2 and you still got measurements different from what MIPS was. So I would recommend, if you're still reporting with Medicaid, that you're still running that information and you're making sure that you're on task with being able to attest with that information that pulls on. So when you run the report, providers affiliated with the practice, the one thing that you need to be aware of is that the CHR metrics report screen, it calculates the total transitions of care encounters in the practice generated by providers affiliated with the practice, and it will display at the top of the report. You must make sure that the practice is included in the encounter to this, for this option to give you credit, meaning that this report, the metric report is generated by clinical encounters that create the unique patient information that pulls through. And so if you've got encounters set up in your system that is not affiliated with the practice for which that patient was seen that day, that's where you're going to see the numbers that are off on that. So just be aware of this when you go to run it, as to if you're seeing information that isn't correct or what you feel like you should see. The report will go ahead and bring in information like this with the results for the practice and this practice, whatever your practice code information is in there, might happen to be 1. So you'll see that information that right there at the top, information that pulls through. And then on your clinical encounters, when they're created, it's going to be in the practice setup as to where that is calculated. You've got your providers associated with the practice that are set up in your records 2 of the practice setup, but you also, these encounters must have this calculated right in here as well. We have that information into it. So just make sure you're aware of that moving forward. And this is just a little information again, is run this report often and in regular intervals, at least once a week, to make sure that your providers are meeting the appropriate objectives. You still have time on here just in the first part of November, but make sure that you're running it and make sure that you know that you're where you need to be, because you don't want to wait. If you wait till, okay, I'm going to test in the middle of February and now I'm going to run the report and all of a sudden I'm finding out that I'm not meeting the measure, then you're going to be in trouble. So make sure you're running it now and know exactly where you're at. And so then when the time comes to a test, then there's not any surprises or you're stressing out trying to figure out how to do it. And like I said, the direct messaging one is a big one when it comes to the information pulling on, because it requires a little bit of work on both ends, sending the direct message out. And my experience with my sites that I'm consulting with is that we're usually setting up a little party between all of us. As we send the direct message, then the other side is getting it and getting that information back. So we're staying on top of that information, that it comes back and forth, so that we can make sure that we're meeting that measure fully and not running down to the very end. So the last thing I kind of want to talk about real quick is the way to get your CPL number. Again, on support side, we get a lot of calls on this, and because it can be challenging information, understanding what it is that you're going in to be able to get on that. And the reason is because we're on 11.1 with Practice Partner. We are certified with our objective information that comes through, but we are not certified for our CQM measures with the 11.1. And so when you go to send in be able to get your CHPL number, you just need to understand a few steps to be able to pull onto it. So this is the link to get to the site there to be able to pull that number up. And you can just search in there. When you search by the product, it's just by putting the product name into the search window. So if you search by EMDs, it's going to bring up all of our product information that you have, just like seen here. And when you find the product that you're going to use, just click on that line. It doesn't do a lot of anything and you can't see it, but if you click on it and then you reach over here and you click on your add the CPDI number, it's going to go ahead and pull up into your CPDI bucket, and it's going to bring that product in. Well, you see that we have these long numbers right in here, information that pulls in, and it's different from what you're seeing in these products above. And the reason for that is because we have to do a combination. We have to link up our product with the CQM tool that is being used. And so in this case, if we're using FigMD, I'm going to bring in my Practice Partner 11.0. If you're using Relay Health, then you want to use your 11.1 with Relay Health. And if not, then it's going to be 11.1 information that pulls in. So then the next step on that, when you get that information coming in, then you're going to want to come up and search again for, in this case, I'd say FigMD. FigMD is going to come down, and then I can go ahead and I'm going to highlight the product that we're using for the qualified registry. I'm going to highlight it again, just click on it. Like I said, the site doesn't do anything, like it doesn't highlight it or anything, just click on it and then just come over and click your little yellow button, and it's going to start calculating up here, and it's going to bring the next product into your window. So then you've got Practice Partner or Medisoft or Lytec, and then the CQM vendor that you're using, information that pulls on. Again, I would recommend that you're making sure that you can get that number now, information so that you have it, so that it's there for you. Again, when you go to a test, you know, everything's in place. But once I bring the next one in, that information, will combine and join those two products. And when I do that, then it's going to go ahead and it will generate a number for me that I can go ahead and attest onto it. So that's how that information is done, but you've got to combine those information that pulls onto it because, again, the certification changes and differences in that. The other thing, this is kind of the largest window on that, but I just kind of want to calculate. For those of you who have migrated to UpDocs, we've had a few in the beta process and maybe moving to that part of it. When you go to attest, if UpDocs is going to be part of that attestation period for the patient portal, you're also going to want to include that, and it's the 2016.1 when you come in. You've got a couple of down here that you can see. So if you basically when you go to a test in that time period that you're going to go ahead and attest for the objectives, the PI objectives, if UpDocs is a portion of that, then you would want to go ahead and make sure you add that certification as well to be able to calculate a whole certification number. If you're on WebView, then you wouldn't have to worry about that. But if, again, like I said, is during that time period, if you bring UpDocs on, you migrate to them, and that's going to be included in your patient portal through that attestation period, make sure that you also add that there. So you can see this bucket information that pulls on. I've got my 3 products right in here, and then I could go ahead and get the cert number. So this window is, again, it's when you go on to it, it's just a matter of bringing in your products and understanding that with 11.1, when you go to a test, the clinical quality measures are not part of that certification. So you have to join it with the vendor that you're using to be able to report your CQM data information that pulls onto it. And there again, if you've got an ACO or somebody else that's going to be submitting that data, they're going to want to know what this number is to be able to combine it with, so they can report that information to you. So just, again, I would recommend that if you haven't done it yet, to go in there and make sure that you've got everything married up and can get the number of information that you need to be able to be prepared for your certification, for your attestation. Okay, so that kind of ends mine to just keep on harping about you being ready for attestation. The next I'm going to turn it over to Elena, and she's going to walk us through some new prescribing updates and the IDP process. All right, thanks, and Elena, it's all yours.
Thanks, Susie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I really do appreciate everyone on this call that's joined and taking an active role in learning about what's going on. I do have quite a bit of new information about an ID proofing process for new prescribers coming on to the Practice Partner software. This process is part of our SureScript certification we needed to go through as a company and business to make sure that we have met all of the requirements from SureScript to make sure the message formatting and all of the transactions are being approved and going smoothly through SureScript. That means fewer errors on your side and a much more smooth electronic prescribing process. So all of this change is coming with your version 11.2 install for Practice Partner. So I just want to make sure that everyone is aware, and I reiterate that none of these changes will happen until version 11.2 is installed. Please feel free to post any questions in the Q&A box. I would really like for everyone to feel free to ask anything that you're wondering about. It's a great opportunity while we're on the phone to go ahead and talk about the topics that you need help with. So if anything about the enterprise prescribing update is troubling you, or if you have any questions about that, please post those questions into the Q&A box so that we can help to get them answered. So I am going to show several screenshots in this presentation. I won't be doing a live demo this time, but anytime that I am presenting these screenshots or doing the live demo for the enterprise, we have not gone to beta yet, even with enterprise prescribing functionality. So everything that I'm showing is still in development, still being worked on, and we are going through refinements and have improvements to make. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that things are likely to be adjusted and improved before you see this update. So a little bit about this ID proofing process. Again, it was part of our SureScript certification that we needed to update for Practice Partner and EMDs as a whole. As you're probably well aware, there are quite a few prescribing regulations coming through all the government processes and being implemented across the board, some different per state, some on a federal level. We are trying to work with our partners to make sure that each of these has all the capabilities that you need to meet all of your requirements. So ID proofing is one of those processes that is now required for every single prescriber, whether they are going to prescribe controlled substances or not. So ID proofing is going to be part of the new process for entering a prescriber after the 11.2, after the 11.2 update is installed. All current prescribers that are in the system at the time of the update will be grandfathered into the electronic prescribing system. So this only applies to people that need to be added to partner after 11.2. The ID proofing process is very similar to the EPCS ID proofing process. If there is a new prescriber that is coming into your practice and they may want to do EPCS at some point, think hard before registering them for prescribing, because if they go through the ID proofing process for non-EPCS prescribing, they will have to go through it all over again to then implement controlled substance or electronic prescribing for controlled substances prescribing in the Practice Partner system. So just to save time and reduce complexity, if you know EPCS is probably part of that prescriber's future, it might be a good idea to go ahead and begin the registration process with EPCS. That registration and ID proofing process will count for both of the EPCS requirements and the non-controlled substance requirements. So I know this screen's a little bit small. I was trying to make sure that everyone had this information as soon as possible. Let me go ahead and walk you through this screen and describe it to you so that we don't have to concentrate too much on the small details. This is the Prescriber Administration screen that will be available in version 11.2. This screen will list every single provider that's in the software and the practice or facility that they are associated with. So if they're associated with multiple facilities will be listed along with each provider. There are three columns on the far right side of the screen. One is for IDP, so this is going to designate or be associated with the ID proofing process for non-controlled substance prescribers. The second column is for EPCS. and that will be regarding any prescribers that do need to go through registration processes for controlled substance prescribing. The third column is for the SureScripts SPI. This number is required to be generated so that SureScripts can identify the prescriber and make sure that all the formatting and all of the data is correct within that prescription to go through their network. If you'll notice at the very bottom of the screen, there are a few numbers, and I apologize that it's a little bit hard to read, but it does say available licenses, and I think it's kind of, it might be a little misleading. It's kind of like available registrations rather than licenses, but this prescriber administration screen is being used across multiple product lines, so some product lines refer to things as licenses and others refer to it as a registration process, so just keep that in mind. But at the bottom there we've got IDP 0 of 10, meaning I have 10 available IDP registrations that I can complete at this practice, and 0 of them have been done. So I would be able to see many invite buttons on my IDP column. The next one is EPCS, and I've got 1 available EPCS registration out of 4. So again, I see several EPCS invite buttons because any provider that has the appropriate data in their demographics that has not completed EPCS registration would be available to go through the process. So once a practice has ordered a registration for IDP for non-controlled substances or an EPCS registration for controlled substances, they'll then be able to come to this screen within Practice Partner and click that invite button depending on their provider's preference. So a little bit more about going through the process. When the screen opens, if there's any data missing from the provider's demographics, an exclamation mark with a missing info text will be seen in the column. When the user hovers over that missing info text, there will be a hover that lists out the pieces of data that are needed in order to make that button available there. So for instance, I was watching one of our quality assurance folks go through the process in testing, and they hovered over that missing info text and it said provider DEA not entered, or provider last name not entered. So there are pieces of information that are required in order to go through the process. It'll tell you what it needs. Once that information is entered into the provider demographics, you'll be able to come back into this screen, and if there are any available registrations, those invite buttons will appear. Once a prescribing registration has gone through the ordering process by contacting EMDs, our order fulfillment team will enable that invite button in your system, and you'll be able to, that'll all be done electronically, so that you'll be able to come into this window and see that invite button. When that order fulfillment process is complete, that'll happen electronically again. That will also increment your available registrations or licenses at the bottom of the screen and let you know that the total is now incremented as well as the available number. Since there are several invite buttons, depending on how many providers are in the system, the invite button will appear for anyone who has not already gone through the registration process, even if only one registration was ordered. The reason for that is we will not designate a specific user. The site administrator or whoever is going to initiate this part of the registration process can make that decision when they open this screen. So when they come in, they'll be able to click invite for the provider that they would like to initiate the process for. Once the invite button has been clicked, this screen will appear. It's just a small window that will appear on top of the prescriber administration screen. It will allow the user to enter the prescriber's email and phone number. Once the user clicks Save here, this will trigger InfinID, which is associated with Dr. First, to email the prescriber with a link to begin the ID proofing process. So this is an example email that we received during our testing process. It will come from InfinID, and again, that's a partner of Dr. First, or a piece of Dr. First. And it will be sent to the email address that is entered onto that small screen. So be careful to make sure that the prescriber will be checking that email address when that's entered. This will provide a link to begin the ID proofing, and I believe it's with Experian. I think we'll see that here in a few minutes. Yeah, it is. So pieces of the InfinID proofing process are very similar to the EPCS ID proofing process, so you'll see a lot of the same things. And again, that's the reason why we'd like to avoid any duplicative work and hassle if the prescriber would or may want to do EPCS prescribing in the future, and they won't have to go through this process 2 times. But that link from the email will take them to the InfinID site and allow the user to go through the process. They will need to enter some credit card information, just again for the ID proofing, and then they'll be asked a set of questions that the system feels that only they should know the answer to. Once that process is complete and the answers have been entered successfully, the user will receive a confirmation email from InfinID, like the one over here on the left, and it will include a confirmation code. Electronically, it may take a day or 2, but once that process has been complete and that confirmation code has been generated, the prescriber administration screen within Practice Partner will show a verified text under the IDP column for that provider. So I know it's really small, but it says verified, and it's got a green shield-looking icon next to it. While the provider is in the process of the ID proofing, that will show pending, meaning that the user's in progress, it has not been completed. Once the IDP shows verified, it will only appear there for a short period of time, and you may never actually catch it in that process. It would show up for a short period of time and then go away because the register button appears. Once the register button is clicked under the SPI column, under that same row, so if you'll notice, we see verified under the IDP column. And then on the far right, under the SPI column, there is a register button at the very bottom of the screen. Once that register button is clicked, the SPI for that provider is generated and the process is complete. Once that SPI number populates that column, the verified text goes away and that section or that column remains blank. So this highlighted user on this screen, you can see the SPI number has been generated and the IDP column is now blank. So throughout the process, it does try to give you the most up-to-date status for that prescriber. If you're an administrator or if you're a staff member that's keeping track of the registration process, it's a good way to go in here, check how things are going, and let you know what the status is. If, when the register button is clicked, there is any issue at all generating that SPI for SureScripts, you'll get a failed message here on the column. You'll be able to hover over that message just like you can hover over the missing info text, and it'll give you a reason for the failure and the ability to try again. So you can try again as many times as you need. Sometimes there's connectivity issues. I've only seen that fail message once. Every other time it's worked really smoothly and it populates very quickly. But if for any reason you do get a failure, it will tell you why and it will give you the ability to try again until you get that SPI generated. So that is a lot of the main process for the new IDP for e-prescribing after the 11.2 update. Allison, were there any questions that we were not able to answer?
No, it looks like we were able to go through and answer all of the questions that did come in. I think it's important to just point out there were some questions about, are there going to be some instructional videos available? And Susie did reply there that we're working on some training videos for Engage, which will be very helpful in understanding the process and going through. So be on the lookout for those. They're being worked on now. And then there were some questions around when 11.2 is going to be available. I'm sure that's a question that many folks have, so that's going to be available in early 2019. But other than that, we were able to answer the questions that are here. We'll give it another just 30 seconds to allow people to get in any last-minute questions they might have.
Yeah, so soon we'll be able to go through that process and get better screenshots, of course, and have a presentation for it that can be posted to Engage and let everyone really see some detail with that screen. Also, one of our future Lunch and Learns for Practice Partner, I'll be able to get into that window and show it to you. So much more to come on that, as well as the enterprise prescribing updates, and we will keep you posted. I just wanted to get all of this information out in front of you before we got too far down the process, and make sure that you're aware of what's coming in 11.2.
I might add that we're going to also have quick start guides that we'll be releasing out to everybody, so that it's a quick start as to what needs to get done and process to be able to move forward as well. So we're going to be putting out a lot of education to help through this.
Yes, and so we are going to continue the enterprise prescribing webinar series. So our next one is going to be, it's going to be a little bit further out because our next one would be normally scheduled the day before Thanksgiving. We understand that's not the best day for folks. Some of you may be taking an early vacation or trying to get things wrapped up at the office before the holiday break. So our next session is going to be on the 28th. So keep your eye out for the invitation for that, and then we're going to carry the series through December. So there's a lot more information that will be coming your way. Like we said, it's, we're trying to get you as much detail as possible before it's released so you're fully prepared. But at this time, there doesn't look like there are any more questions that are coming in. So I'm going to say, let's wrap it up. Thank you again for everybody for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule to learn a little bit more about these changes and updates that are coming. And thank you to Susie and Elena for another great presentation. So at this time, we are concluded, and everybody have a fantastic day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.